So the main stereotypes of Asian Americans, it's interesting in that there really has never been just one, right? And I think that's one of the most important things, that Asian Americans, because we've been a marginal population, we've sort of conveniently sometimes been the model minority, and other times we've been the yellow peril that gets demonized. We can talk more about why in different historical periods, in different political and cultural moments, Asians have been portrayed and represented in different ways. So the yellow peril is the concept that Asia, and in particular times Japan in the early 20th century, represented a growing threat to America and the West because of its rising military power. At other times it's been more of the economic power. In the 1980s, Japan was seen more an economic threat. Today, we more likely in America see China viewed as this potential threat, competitor, a source. And there's always been, this real fear, not just that they were a competitor, but that they were in the process of overtaking us. So even if you go back to the early 20th century in California, there were, or in the 19th century, there were discussions about the Chinese population is growing so fast that it will soon, be larger than the white population. Or in early 20th century California, Japanese farmers are taking over so much land that we need these alien land laws to ban Japanese immigrants from owning land. Otherwise, they're going to, white farmers won't even be able to, find work at all in California. So it's always this sense that it's always tied to immigration, right? This notion that Asia is this rising foreign power, or certain places like Japan are rising foreign power, that the people they're sending over to the U.S. are a menace, but they are just the tip of the iceberg of this bigger yellow horde or brown horde or yellow peril that will contaminate or pollute the entire country. Of the foreign power is always connected to the fear of the immigrant and the threat that the immigrant purportedly represents. So the model minority is something that emerges really after World War II, and it emerges for a combination of domestic and foreign policy reasons. So with Asia, right, it's always been important, starting with World War II, for Americans to begin to differentiate between the good Asians and the bad Asians. So during World War II, you of course, you have a lot of fear and hatred of the Japs or the Nips, right? And that, oftentimes precludes any differentiation between, members of the Japanese army and the leaders of Japan's imperialist army and Japanese American immigrants, even of course American-born Japanese, or what we call themselves the Nisei, the second generation, the first generation born in the U.S., the children of the immigrants. So they were viewed as Japs, as many people know. They were. The argument was that they represented a threat to national security, and it was a military necessity to put over 100,000 Japanese Americans, including members of my own family. My mother lived in a concentration camp for 3 years, and she was even separated from her father, who was put into a higher security camp, like what today would be called the camp for the enemy combatants, or the suspicious enemy aliens. So they were put into these concentration camps. But then some of the members some of the leaders in America found that Americans couldn't tell the difference between the Japs and the Chinese or the Filipinos, who were supposed to be our allies. So there were some cases of other Asians wearing signs. Japanese Americans tried to wear buttons that said, "I am an American, please treat me the way you would treat other Americans." There were some instances of other Asian groups wearing buttons that said, "I am Chinese," or "I am Filipino," or "I am Korean," to differentiate themselves in Japan. So Time in Life came out with articles like How to Tell Japs from Chinese, right? separate out your friends from the enemy, you know. And so there's a new sense that, you know, Americans needed to understand that, you know, there's an enemy in Asia, represented by the yellow peril, you know, Japan, but there's also, you know, these good Asians, right, that are our allies, and they wanted to extend that to Chinese Americans, Filipino Americans. In other words, treat Chinese in America more fairly, so that America will be looked at as a more just and democratic country in the eyes of people in Asia. So the Chinese Exclusion Act was actually abolished during World War II because of this really intense pressure and sentiment to make America look more like an ally of, you know, the good Asians.